Welcome to the York Daily Record Sunday News Editorial Board. My name is Scott Fisher. I'm the editorial page editor at the paper, and we are here today with John Quigley, who is the Secretary of the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. And we welcome you and appreciate you taking the time to come talk to us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I thought we would kind of start off. Maybe you could talk a little bit about why you're in New York. I know a little bit about that, and then we also have some questions that we'd like to ask you about
Sure.
sort of general issues if you have a moment.
Sure, happy to.
Okay.
No, I'm in York today because we are having the 8th of 14 listening sessions on Pennsylvania's response to the federal Clean Power Plan requirement. Back on August 3rd, President Obama unveiled the Clean Power Plan, which requires the nation to reduce its carbon dioxide emissions by about 35% by 2030. And for Pennsylvania, we're required to reduce our emissions by 33% by 2030. And at Governor Wolf's direction, we have decided to listen first and write second. And our aspiration is to submit to EPA next September 6th a final Clean Power Plan for Pennsylvania, a plan that works for Pennsylvania, that takes into account the state's position as a net energy exporter, that takes into account our diverse energy mix. So a plan that works for Pennsylvania, but the aspiration is to submit a final plan next September, which is a very ambitious timeline, but the governor directed us to listen to Pennsylvanians first on what should go into that plan and write second. So we scheduled a total of 14 listening sessions around the state, as well as a 60-day public comment period. This is the 8th of these 14 listening sessions, and importantly, 10 of the 14 listening sessions are either in or adjacent to what are called environmental justice communities. That's communities where 20% or more of our folks live in poverty, and or 30% or more of the population is minority. And these communities typically bear a disproportionate burden in terms of not only electricity costs as a percentage of their incomes, but also of pollution. So EPA has indicated that that's an area of its emphasis, and frankly, it's the right thing to do, and it's something that we wanted to do anyway. So we very intentionally scheduled these meetings to make sure that we were reaching out to these communities that are disproportionately impacted. So again, we're in full listening mode, and we'll be through the middle of November, and then we will pick up the pen and start writing a plan for Pennsylvania.
Where will you be meeting today?
We'll be meeting in the Wyndham across the street here from the York Daily Record. We're looking forward to another good turnout. We've had just super turnout in the first 7 sessions, probably anywhere between 60 and 100 people, anywhere from 15 to 35 commentators actually offering testimony. And we continue to get a lot of testimony and comments submitted through our e-comment website. Earlier this year, we created at DEP an e-comment tool that would allow citizens to send in their comments on any matter electronically and also see in real time what other comments have coming in. So it's an example of Governor Wolf's government that works to make ourselves more transparent to the public and how these rules get developed at DEP, and the response to that has been great as well.
Is it too late for people watching this live stream to come to today's session?
Not at all.
2 o'clock, right?
Not at all. It starts at 2, it runs till 5, or when the last testifier is completed, whichever is sooner. Sometimes folks think that we might hang around for an hour or so afterwards when there's nobody coming in. So we encourage folks, if they're interested in coming, to show up early. The doors are open. It's a public meeting, and even if they haven't signed up to give testimony and they would like to, we make sure that we make time at the end of the meetings for anyone who hasn't had a chance to sign up that has a comment to come forward.
Can you give us kind of a broad outline of what this EPA plan will require of Pennsylvania? What are the goals and where are we now?
Well, this plan, again, requires Pennsylvania to reduce its carbon dioxide emissions by 33% by 2030. That's an ambitious, but I think achievable target. And what we will have to do, and EPA set out in the final rule a number of building blocks: heat efficiency improvements at existing electricity generating units, renewable energy and energy efficiency are big parts of the portfolio. What we have to do is determine what the role of all of Pennsylvania's existing energy sources are. We're the number 2 energy exporter in the nation. We're the number 3 energy generator in the nation. We're number 4 in coal production. We become overnight the number 2 natural gas producing state in the nation. I mean, we're literally 11 years ago we were hardly producing anything. To the number 2 producing state. We're 12th in solar electric capacity and 16th in wind capacity. So we have a very diverse energy mix in Pennsylvania. And the challenge for us is how do we take advantage of that mix and write a plan that allows us to reduce our carbon emissions and still maintain the role of energy in the state's economy. It's a big part of our economy. And frankly, the switch from coal to gas that has been occurring in recent years as a result of the low price of shale gas has started to reduce the state's emissions. We're probably 20 or 25% on the path toward that 33% reduction by 2030. So our existing sources have already played a role, but we've got to figure out what is the smart role, what is the smart plan for Pennsylvania to make sure we hit that hurdle and still maintain our energy portfolio.
So the goal is not to be an energy producer or exporter, just a cleaner energy exporter.
Well, the goal of the Clean Power Plan is to reduce our carbon emissions.
Okay.
The governor's goals on top of that is meet that requirement, but also maintain the state's role as an energy exporting state, maintain a role for the state's existing energy sources, including coal. Coal is still a big part of Pennsylvania's economy, and the governor's expectation is that we would write a plan that maintains that at a workable, appropriate level. And so the governor has actually challenged us to go beyond just the 4 squares of the EPA rule to make sure that we craft a plan that works for Pennsylvanians, which is why we have to listen before we write.
So you know that in Governor Wolf's own backyard, there's one of the largest coal plants in the state. How would what you're doing here affect plants like Burner Island and other facilities like that?
Well, some of it depends on the individual company and the individual economics of these facilities. I've met with, I think, every electric generating unit or every owner of EGUs in Pennsylvania since I took office in January to hear about their particular circumstances. And I will say that the coal-fired power plant industry is not monolithic. There's a lot of gradations even within that fuel mix. In the case of Burner Island, I know that Talon Energy is in the process of running a natural gas line, a 6-mile natural gas line that will allow them to co-fire that facility, coal or gas, depending on the price of the fuel. So their goal is to be able to respond, and when the price of coal is low, run coal. When the price of gas is lower, run gas. That in itself will significantly reduce the emissions from that facility. I have heard from other electric generating units that don't necessarily have that capacity that their thinking is perhaps we'll run less. That might be the response. We've heard concern and questions from others that have asked us very pointed questions about some of the details of the Clean Power Plan. One of the things that we will be able to do in this plan is generate allowances, create an allowance system so that relatively cleaner facilities can generate credits which they can then sell, trade, or some market-based mechanism to others like coal-fired power plants that might need these additional credits in order to run. So we have to look at what that market looks like, and we have heard from some of the coal-fired power plants indicating their interest in how those allowances would be provided. Should they be auctioned? Should they just be given to, or some portion of them be given to existing units? And these are the kinds of technical and economic details that we have to work out over the next several months.
I just got a letter to the editor recently on that topic a little bit. It was an interesting take on it. The person said, okay, I understand this idea of sort of trading credits, pollution credits and so forth, but I happen to live near a dirty, polluting power plant, and I don't really care that there's somebody else getting credits and so forth. I still have to deal with the pollution that's coming right next to right in my neighborhood.
Right.
How do you deal with that issue?
Well, the idea of credit trading has worked very successfully nationally in terms of NOx and SOx, the smog-producing emissions. And overall, the nation has benefited from much cleaner air. And here in Pennsylvania, we have gotten much cleaner air quality, much better air quality over the last decade or so because of the existence of these kind of trading mechanisms. Now, and frankly, that doesn't necessarily respond to the individual who lives right next door to a particular facility. So, and these types of trading programs were not designed to, nor really could they, get down to that kind of a granular level. It's all about overall air quality for the Commonwealth, which is significantly improved. But again, one of the reasons that we are paying particular attention to the issue of environmental justice is, the folks that live next to these plants are typically the ones who reside in environmental justice communities. We want to hear from them specifically. We want to see if we can understand their concerns, at least hear them, maybe respond to them as best we can, but we absolutely need to be taking those kinds of concerns into account.
Right. In our most recent Sunday edition, wrote an interesting story about the future of 3 Mile Island. Apparently, it didn't get a bid to sell its power in 2017, 18, I think it is. And so its sort of future is in doubt.
Yes.
They're looking at the economics of it and so forth. Conceivably, it could shut down, which, in York County, we have sort of a love-hate relationship with TMI because, well, 1979 happened and it was horrible here. But so what we're concerned, we could lose a source of clean power there. What role does the state play in that sort of equation in terms of trying to meet the clean air goals, but dealing with the economics of nuclear power versus other power sources?
Right. Well, we have a competitive electric market in Pennsylvania, and 3 Mile Island didn't clear that hurdle about a month or so ago. So there's a question of just the functioning of Pennsylvania's electricity market that has to be considered. But we do have to very consciously pay attention to the role of nuclear power. It's a big portion of it's about 95% of the clean energy generation in Pennsylvania, carbon-free generation in Pennsylvania. And to lose a nuclear facility would have pretty significant impacts on our ability to meet the Clean Power Plan goals. So we have talked with Exelon at length and have asked them to share some data, share some of their analysis on what they think a clean power plan that works for them should look like. We need to understand these companies' economics as we write this plan, but we are absolutely concerned about the continued viability of Pennsylvania's nuclear fleet. We're one of the major nuclear generating states in the country, and I think it's going to be important for us to maintain that.
Is there a role for government in that? I mean, this is probably an unsophisticated way to say it, but do taxpayers prop up these facilities if they're not economically viable? Is that something that we would consider?
Well, I wouldn't go that far to say that the taxpayers would subsidize it. It's a question of how do we, within the confines of the market mechanisms and the allowance systems that are permittable under a Clean Power Plan, how do we use those tools to perhaps support the continued viability of nuclear power plants in Pennsylvania? Very complicated economics. We're one of 4 states that was selected by the National Governors Association to participate in what they call their Policy Academy. There's four states across the nation that have been given access to some very sophisticated modeling tools. Model the electricity market and look at the generation mix and look at the implications for reliability and price of electricity. We were selected because of our prominence as an energy exporting state, and we are in the midst of doing these very sophisticated modeling runs to essentially create some scenarios and game out what different alternatives might look like. Very, very sophisticated modeling, and we're fortunate to be one of the 4 states in the nation that have gotten to
Will that
it.
analysis play into what you write in terms of dealing with the clean power plan?
Absolutely. That analysis is one of the critical underpinnings of what will go into our plan. We want to see if we can understand to the greatest extent possible what the implications of various policy options would be. And this model will enable us to do that. We might even go beyond that model and avail ourselves of some additional modeling services. We want to make sure that we get this right. This is a very ambitious goal, but we think we can achieve it, but we want to make sure that we have the right tools and do it in a very transparent way. This is not something that will be done in a black box. This will be done transparently so that all stakeholders can see what the implications of our decisions look like.
So you said this is the 8th session. What are the themes that you've heard so far I'm sure they're all over, the comments are all over the place, but are there any sort of major themes that you're hearing in these listening sessions?
Well, I think the most important thing, and something that surprised me perhaps a little bit, is there is very strong support for the Clean Power Plan rule across Pennsylvania. We've been in southwest Pennsylvania. We had a hearing in Harrisburg a couple of weeks ago, obviously down here in central Pennsylvania as well. Very strong support for the Clean Power Plan. We have heard concerns certainly from the coal industry, which isn't opposed to the rule. They're asking us to take advantage of the 2-year extension that we could potentially request from EPA to allow the picture for them to become a little bit clearer. We have heard very limited outright opposition to the plan from what I would call some special interest organizations like Americans for Prosperity. But very strong support from individuals, from folks who have retrofitted their homes or bought solar panels for their homes, certainly environmental organizations. We've heard from the NAACP about the importance of paying attention to environmental justice issues. In Philadelphia last week and in Marcus Hook, again, very strong support for energy efficiency. One of the elements of the Clean Power Plan is it's what's called the Clean Energy Incentive Plan. While the requirements to start reducing our emissions don't kick in until 2022, there's a 2-year window in 2020 and 2021 where any renewable energy that comes online or any energy efficiency projects in low-income communities counts twice, generates double credits. So we're asking stakeholders to give us advice on how we take advantage of that Clean Energy Incentive Program. And in Philly and in Marcus Hook, in the shadow of Shell's very large facility in Marcus Hook, we heard very strong support for the Clean Power Plan. So I'm pleased. Again, want to pay attention to the needs of Pennsylvania's energy industry. We've heard from a number of the generators urging us to submit a final plan by next September because they want to have some certainty. They want to know what the rules of the road are. And I think that's an important point that shouldn't be dismissed and shouldn't be minimized, is that Pennsylvania's electric industry so far is asking us to submit a final rule because they want certainty. They want to know what the rules of the road are going forward. The more time that they have to plan for what those rules will look like in 2020 or 2022, the better for them. So I think that's some very important advice and very important requests that we've gotten so far.
And you gave some metrics about the environmental justice community on how that's defined. Could you give those again, and then also talk a little bit more about how that plays out in York County? Are parts of York falling under this category, and is it how does that split off like geographically?
Well, I don't have the map committed to memory, but the definition of environmental justice communities are where 20% or more of the population live in poverty, under the federal poverty limit, and or 30% or more of the population is minority. And typically, when you look at that statewide and certainly nationally, it's those low-income minority communities tend to be clustered. They tend to be where the plants are. And they also, obviously because they are lower income, pay more of their income for energy. So they get hit twice. And their interests need to be heard in this planning process. I know that the incidence of asthma for example, African American children is something like 3 times the national average. There are certain populations that bear a disproportionate burden from energy costs and from pollution, and we need to hear from them as we develop this plan, because this is the biggest step that the federal government has ever taken on climate, and it certainly has huge implications for public health and cleaner air, and we want to make sure that we're listening to folks.
So I could see in New York City, which is relatively small and it has a high percentage of low-income community, but in terms of the actual pollution that it suffers, is there any way to quantify how are city residents suffering from air pollution more than suburban residents in York County? Is there any way to quantify that?
Well, we do have a statewide air quality monitoring network at DEP, where we monitor various air pollution constituents, and we can tell with I wouldn't say, it certainly isn't block by block or maybe even town by town, but regionally what air quality is. And there are some issues related to smog in this portion of the state that we're paying special attention to. But there are a number of areas, certainly in the southwest portion of the state, in the Philly region, there are some areas that are out of attainment for things like NOx and SOx that we are constantly working to improve. There was a new ozone standard released by EPA last week. Went from 75 parts per billion to 70 parts per billion. We need to understand the implications of that for Pennsylvania and what we need to do to implement that new standard going forward and essentially tighten up air emission requirements pretty much across the state, and that certainly will benefit public health in a very significant way.
Your county is constantly getting failing grades from the American Lung Association's surveys and so forth. So we need the help here, I think.
I have never experienced asthma. Fortunately, personally, I know people who have. I know how traumatic that is. You can end up hospitalized, and folks have died from severe asthma attacks. It's a very significant public health issue, and we have a responsibility to address it. And while you might want to wipe the slate clean and eliminate risks entirely, that's not the way the world works. So we have to incrementally do whatever we can under federal guidelines to reduce the impacts to folks, reduce the risks of air pollution, and it's something that we're very focused on.
Are there plans to opt into the emission trading credit market with other states, as was kind of laid out as one option for the Clean Power Plan nationwide?
Well, we're considering it. We have not taken anything off the table yet. So we're looking at the possibility of some type of interstate trading or developing a trade-ready platform that you might not have to get into a formal agreement, but if you have certain common elements in your plan, you can still trade. We've been approached about joining RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. That hasn't been taken off the table yet. By the same token, we have been in a running conversation since the spring with all of the PJM states about the possibility of some type of multi-state trading platform. So we're
defined as the PJM.
As the PJM grid. And so we haven't taken anything off the table. And again, we're asking, we have a series of about 21 questions that we put out as part of the public comment period, as part of these listening sessions, and we're soliciting input. And we've heard all kinds of different suggestions on that score, from join RGGI to definitely trade. Actually heard one commentator last week say we shouldn't trade, because we should make sure that all of the investments in clean energy and energy efficiency actually occur within the borders of Pennsylvania. So there's actually arguments to be made on all sides of this, and at the end of the day, we have to figure out what the smart way forward is based on all this input.
Some years ago, we heard a lot about the sort of impact of plants that are to the west of us, to the northwest, the sort of prevailing winds bringing that stuff. Is that still an issue in Pennsylvania? Or?
Yes, it is absolutely still an issue. There's still pollution blowing into the state from western states. And by the same token, there are states east of us, like New Jersey. I have a phone call in the next couple of weeks with my counterpart in New Jersey, Commissioner Martin, who has the same concerns about pollution blowing into New Jersey from Pennsylvania. So there's a whole interstate.
Okay. They send all their trash down.
Well, there are legitimate questions, legitimate concerns. There is a good neighbor provision in federal law that we are taking very seriously. At the end of the day, it's the job of my agency to protect Pennsylvania's air, land, and water and public health. And that's a difficult challenge sometimes, but I think it's a high calling, and we're doing the best we can, and Governor Wolf is certainly focused on doing things that are smart, that work for Pennsylvania.
I had some questions on other issues. Did you want to delve deeper into the...
I have some stuff I'll just ask off the broadcast, because they were just little details about some of the numbers you gave. I think. Thank you very much, though.
Sure.
I'm just curious about, in terms of staffing at the DEP. Does the agency have enough resources right now to adequately be the sort of the air pollution and the water pollution policeman of the state? Do you have what you need in order to do your job?
Well, I think the best way to answer that is to take you back over the last, say, about 10 years, since the start of the Great Recession. And I actually was in state government when the bottom fell out of the economy. In 2009, I happened to have just stepped into the chair as Secretary of the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources for Governor Rendell. And I saw the beginning of a series of severe, some would say savage, budget cuts to state government. And over the last 10 years, the average state agency in state government lost 6% of its workforce, 6% of its complement. DEP, however, lost 14% of its complement at the same time, over the same time period. So my agency was really singled out in terms of reducing headcount.
How many people do you have?
We have about 20, I'll say 2,700 total. We've lost about 675 positions over the last 10 years. And that's at least 480 of those are boots on the ground, folks that process permits, folks that do inspections, and people that are on the front lines of protecting public health. So the agency has borne the disproportionate share of the burden. Now, and Governor Wolf understands that. In his budget proposal that he unveiled last February, he put an almost 6% general fund budget increase on the table for DEP. Now, obviously, we don't have a state budget yet, but the governor understands how savagely DEP was cut, and he put on the table one of the largest general fund budget increases for the agency in memory.
So those cuts came under...
It started at the last 2 years of the Rendell administration as when we hit the Great Recession and the bottom fell out of the economy, and they continued particularly so in the previous 4 years. But over that 10-year span, we lost 14% of our complement. And that has certainly made it very challenging for us to perform the basic functions of the agency. And now here we sit without a budget, relying on the budget that has been passed and vetoed by the governor. It has about $1.5 billion of gimmicks in it. It has more than a $1.25 billion structural deficit. And if we continue to kick that can down the road, and even Governor Corbett's own budget secretary in December said there's nothing left to cut. So if we continue with the gimmicks and the smoke and the mirrors, on July 1st of next year, 8 months from now, we're looking at probably a $2.3 billion structural deficit before you put one additional dime into public education. That translates into roughly, for my agency, another 7% budget cut. That's another 100 at least positions. That would seriously degrade our ability to meet the minimum requirements. It would realistically place Pennsylvania's air and water quality and public health at risk. And from my standpoint, we can't afford to keep kicking the can down the road. And my boss obviously has proposed some very fundamental reforms and a fiscal restructuring of the state. But we can't continue to cut because we are really jeopardizing public health and environmental protection.
So the shale tax, in some, would that go directly to the DEP, or would it just basically help relieve some pressure elsewhere in government in order to fund your operations there?
Well, the governor's severance tax proposal is designated largely to restore funding and increase funding for public education. In the budget that he proposed in February, he did, however, propose that $10 million of the proceeds of the severance tax be directed to DEP to hire 50 additional inspectors related to oil and gas. And clearly we need those inspection positions to make sure we're protecting public health and the environment. He also proposed a $225 million alternative energy package that he would have taken some of the money coming in from the severance tax and floated a bond, and $225 million of that would have gone for alternative energy efficiency projects on farms, for example. All of that is still hanging out there as things that the governor wants to drive. So a severance tax is absolutely important for my agency. It's even more important for public education in Pennsylvania. And it's just common sense. We're the only natural gas producing state in the country without one. And the governor has offered substantive compromises on his original proposal, made sure to retain the very popular and very effective impact fee as part of his package. So he's done his best to move the ball in terms of getting a severance tax enacted in the Commonwealth. My agency certainly needs it.
In terms of sort of acting as a watchdog or as an enforcer and so forth, I'd like to ask you sort of a little bit about the philosophy of how you handle that kind of enforcement. A couple months ago, Senator Scott Wagner was in here for an editorial board session, and he talked about sort of overbearing government agencies and so forth. And I think he mentioned the DEP had inspected this facility and just showed up unannounced and did an inspection. And he argued that they should call and make appointments before they do that. What is the philosophy of dealing with inspections of facilities?
Well, I have a lot of respect for Senator Wagner. We had a really good visit on my confirmation rounds, and we talked a lot about business and getting my agency off paper and taking advantage of technology. But on this one, I have to disagree with him. We are a regulatory agency. We have to create a culture of compliance because we are enforcing laws that protect Pennsylvania's air, land, and water, and public health. That's a basic function of government. You don't make appointments to make sure there's compliance. We expect compliance from the regulated community, and we don't make appointments to make sure folks are doing what they're supposed to be doing. So, that's just not the way any regulatory agency works. We're about protecting public health.
But is that more of a business-friendly approach to it, or is it, do you hear that from the business community?
Well, frankly, I have not heard the suggestion from any other quarter that we make appointments to do inspections. But what I will say is one of the frequent criticisms of the agency is that we're slow to turn around permits. And I actually have some statistics that I'd like to share with you because I take that very seriously. We want to actually invest in DEP's technology capacity. We want to get off paper, get on electronic forms, e-permitting, e-paying, to really streamline the processing time and reduce the processing time. But one of the challenges that we face is on the front of technology. I talked about how our budget has been cut and how we've lost 14% of our complement. Well, when you look at DEP's IT budget, 11 years ago, we were judged to have the best IT shop in state government. And our IT budget at the time was about $23 million. So if you just factored in inflation, our IT budget should be $28 million, $29 million today. It's actually $16 million. It's a third less in nominal terms than it was 11 years ago. So we're dealing with outdated technology. We have a central database called eFax that is actually not supported anymore by the developer, by Oracle, because it's end of life. It's 1985 technology. So if we are going to streamline our business processes and equip our field inspectors, for example, with iPads instead of carbonless paper forms, we've got to do some serious investment on the IT side. But even with that challenge, I submit that the agency does a pretty darn good job with the resources that it has. Governor Corbett a couple of years ago signed an executive order creating a permit decision guarantee program. We have a certain number of days to issue a permit once it comes in the door complete. And when an application comes into DEP complete, we hit that permit decision guarantee right now 89% of the time. That's down a hair from the beginning of the year because the volume has gone up. And we have a bit of a backlog with fewer bodies. So we're facing increased demands. So our meeting that decision guarantee, we're down now to 89% of the time. But even when an application isn't complete coming in the door, we still hit the mark 82% of the time. But as I hear these kinds of complaints about the agency, I actually asked our folks to go into our database and tell me what really has been going on. So we looked at a 28-month period between May of 2013 and September of this year. And we looked at about 2,600 applications that came into the agency for soil erosion and sedimentation, for water obstructions and encroachments, the Chapter 102, Chapter 105, the big slug of work that we do. And of those 2,600 applications, over 1,000, over 39% had technical or completeness deficiencies when they came in the door. 14% of the applications were incomplete. More than 30% were technically deficient. So we're not getting quality applications coming in the door to the agency. That slows us way down. If the consultant community is not giving us good information to work with, we can't very well issue permits. So there are a lot of businesses across Pennsylvania that aren't getting their money's worth out of their consultants. And we've tried to deliver that message. I had a meeting over in the Capitol about a month ago with a number of senators and representatives to talk about this complaint that they hear from their constituents. And I said to them, you really ought to ask some of your constituents if they're hiring the right consultants. And I think it's important for us to be transparent in our work. If we're slow on turning around permits, I'll own it, and I'll do whatever I can to fix it. But by the same token, if that slowness is being caused by a lack of performance by the consulting community, I think I have a responsibility to let the public know about that too. So we looked at these 2,600 applications. They were submitted by a total of 47 firms. And if you were going to grade them, as you would in school, 65 being an F, so the standard A, B, C, D, F, one consultant out of 47 got an A. In other words, there were more than 90% of their applications were not technically deficient and submitted on time. 5 out of 47 consultants got a B, 7 got a C, 8 got a D, and 26 failed. 26 of the 47 consultants in this random sample that we took, again, over 2.5 years, failed. So it's important for folks when you hear this criticism about DEP to understand that it takes two to tango. We have our job to do. We have to improve our systems, and the governor is committed to improving our business processes. But the other side of the equation is that the regulated community needs to hire consultants that really, where they get their money's worth, and that's not always happening.
This offers maybe a good transition to a local project that's been controversial here. The Purdue soybean processing facility in Quigley Township across the river. Obviously, a lot of people in Elm Township have been concerned about that. You probably have heard about that. You probably get the emails every day about it, like we do.
Yes.
Was the permit that the permits that you looked at, was that one of them that was deficient?
Yes, it was. We actually still have some unanswered questions that we are waiting to hear back from Purdue on. There are some questions that were raised in the public portion of this process, in the public comment period, and the various outreach that we've done about this. And some additional questions that were raised by the public that we want to run down, and we've asked Purdue to answer those questions. We want to look at whether or not this particular technology can be applied to their facility without creating a fire risk. We need to understand this and understand the technical nuances before we make a decision on the permit. We've heard from a lot of folks who are opposed because of the concern about the hexane emissions. On the same token, we've heard very strongly from the agricultural community that sees a big economic opportunity here with this facility. And DEP has to strike the balance. We have the unenviable task. Our role is to demonstrate the connection between economic development and environmental protection. That really, you can't have one without the other. They're inextricably linked. And that requires us to strike a balance and to walk a very fine line, to apply the best available science and get the best facts and make the decision based on the law that we have on the books. Sometimes it's difficult to translate that. It's an extremely technically demanding agency with some very complex rules and sometimes counterintuitive results. But it's our job to get the facts, apply the science and the law, and make a decision. And we're still in the information gathering mode with respect to Purdue.
So, I mean, our position editorially, you're talking to the editorial board, or at least part of it, has been that it seems like it could be a great economic boon to the community, the agricultural community, but it really should have the best pollution control equipment possible in terms of reducing hexane emissions. Is that the DEP's goal on this as well, or you said there's a balancing act there? How do you figure out where we need to be on what we would require, or what you would require?
Well, again, it's a matter of what does the law say? Then what are the facts on the ground? What is the best available science? And there's a significant technical question whether or not this particular control technology that a lot of folks are advocating for can actually work with this facility. And we are trying to understand that. So we're trying to make the best decision that we can. We don't have all the information we need to make a decision, but clearly it's Our job is to protect air, land, water, and public health in Pennsylvania while allowing development to proceed. And we can't separate the two halves of that mission. So it is a difficult challenge. At a minimum, regardless of the decision that we make, we have to be able to explain it. And I think historically DEP has not either had the capacity or in some cases the willingness to show the work and explain the work. And Governor Wolf is one of the fundamental underpinnings of his administration is transparency. In fact, when I sat down with the governor to be interviewed for this job in January, we only talked about two things. And it wasn't the Purdue project, it wasn't clean power or carbon emissions or climate disruption. We talked about transparency and integrity. Now, to me, that was a thrilling conversation to be having with an incoming governor, especially when I was a job applicant. But I think it shows you the kind of man he is, the kind of governor he is, and it's his expectation of me that we do our work with integrity and we do it transparently. So that means integrity is basing it on the law and the science and the facts on the ground, but then showing the work. We have to do better in showing the work, explaining what we do. We're in the process of retooling our website. We want to invest in IT, information technology that would allow us to essentially put all of our data on our website, but do it in a way that's understandable and accessible. Right now, it's tough to find stuff on our website, and that's not a knock on the women and men of my agency. They've been doing the best that they can with the tools that they have. We've got to give them better tools. We've got to invest in those tools that will allow us to present information, not just data, but you've got to translate data into information so the public can understand what we do and why we do it. We need to be able to explain that.
So another big issue in York County is the Chesapeake Bay cleanup. We've not been really meeting our goals in Pennsylvania or really even in York County, I don't think. What's on the agenda for that effort?
Well, you're right. Pennsylvania has not been meeting its goals with respect to the Bay. We're on track for nitrogen, but not so much on phosphorus and not so much on sediment. We're going to miss our 2017 goals. The Commonwealth didn't do much in the way of compliance, creating a culture of compliance in the last 4 years. There are a lot of very significant needs, and Secretary Redding, Secretary Dunn, and I have all talked about the need to reboot Pennsylvania's effort, to give it some coherency. We have been working very hard since January to reach out to all the stakeholders involved, conservation districts, the agricultural community. I just had a meeting in my office last week with the Pennsylvania Farm Bureau and Penn Ag Industries to talk about their role. We need to get better data. We hear constantly from farmers that we're doing the right things, we're doing BMPs, but because no government money is involved, we're not getting credit. We need to get that data and use that to report on Pennsylvania's progress to EPA, because we're not capturing that data right now. So we need to get more data. We certainly need more resources. The cost share is a fundamental underpinning of what we do. I've done some analysis of Pennsylvania's work. Over the last 20 years, we spent $4 billion on cleaning up the Bay. And it's an open question what we have to show for it. But the average cost share to BMP in Pennsylvania is between $45,000 and $55,000. There's a lot of farmers to whom a $45,000 or $55,000 expenditure would put them out of business. So that has given rise to the need for a government cost share. So typically it's 75% public money, 25% private money. I happen to be the vice chair of Penvest, and at our last meeting we approved some outright grants, several $100,000 per farmer, because they simply couldn't afford it. So we understand the margins that Pennsylvania's agricultural community deals with. We have to be sensitive to that. Governor Wolf campaigned on the need for a Growing Greener 3 to get more resources to put into BMPs and to help the agricultural community. But by the same token, there has to be an expectation that farmers will do the right thing. We have to create a culture of compliance. It's really not about the Bay. It's about water quality in Pennsylvania. We all have a responsibility as state officials, as farmers, as citizens, to take ownership and responsibility for Pennsylvania's water quality. So we need the agricultural community to work with us and to do what they can. And we, as a regulatory agency, need to create the framework where there is compliance with Pennsylvania's Clean Streams Law. So we need to do a whole bunch of things. And we have been trying to really start from square one. How do we rebuild a comprehensive, reasonable state approach to improving water quality in Pennsylvania? And it's taken a long time to do that. And we have meetings every single week, conversations every single week, because there are so many actors involved. But I'm hoping that certainly before the end of the year, if not before, we will be able to articulate the strategy going forward. A lot of folks that are anxious for us to do that, including EPA. They're looking at very closely at what we're doing, and we understand that this is a problem that Governor Wolf inherited, and we are doing our best to craft a plan that makes the most sense for Pennsylvania to really start doing some work that has fallen off the table over the last 4 years.
The York County Planning Commission is kind of proud of a program that it put together. I think that it creates sort of a regional runoff plan rather than have each municipality do that. Is that a model that other people are looking at or using? Or?
That is a tremendous model. And the folks here in York County should be commended for that vision to work together, to collaborate. I would like to see that model applied statewide. And one of the conversations that I've been having with EPA is how can we help incentivize that? You know, folks here in York did it on their own. I'd like to help Commonwealth communities replicate that. So are there some resources that we can provide for planning grants and so forth? Right now, the state doesn't have a source of money to help communities deal with stormwater issues. And that problem is going to get worse. With climate change, we're going to see an increasing severity and frequency of storms. We're going to see bigger local problems with runoff and combined sewer overflows and stormwater flows. We're going to see threats to local infrastructure, and we've got to get ahead of this. Pennsylvania's climate is warming rapidly. We just released a report from Penn State University that showed that over the last 100 years, the state warmed about 1.4 degrees Fahrenheit, which in itself is actually significant. But most disturbingly, the state is on track for 1 degree Fahrenheit of warming every single decade between 2000 and 2050. So that by 2050, Pennsylvania will be 5.4 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than it was in 2000. So what does that mean? It means Philadelphia feels like present-day Richmond, Virginia. It means Pittsburgh feels like present-day Washington, D.C. We're going to see a huge change to the hydrologic cycle. We'll get more rain, but it will be in fewer events, and a lot of that will happen in the winter. We're going to see profound impacts on the agricultural sector. Longer growing season, more pests, more invasive species, more heat stress, harder to raise animals, bigger energy costs on farms because you've got to keep the fans going to keep the animals cool. All kinds of negative implications, really, for all of us. Increases in tropical diseases. There are now Lyme disease-bearing ticks in every county of Pennsylvania. We're seeing more cases of West Nile virus. That's going to continue. So it's a long way around the stormwater question, but we are facing some oncoming challenges with stormwater and a lot of other things related to climate. And the leadership that York County citizens have taken in creating this collaborative approach around stormwater is phenomenal. And they're to be applauded, and I'd like to replicate that around the state.
I don't have any other questions. Did you have anything you wanted to ask?
Maybe we could just get on the record the 40-day public comment period. When does that begin and end? And how might a person who is interested make their comment then?
Okay, for the Clean Power Plan, the 60-day public comment period ends on November 12th. And it's a simple matter of going to our website, www.dep.state.pa.us, and look for the e-comment button on our homepage. And that will take you to the site where you can read every comment that has come in or submit your own. And we encourage folks to take advantage of that. It's easy. It's an innovation that I'm proud of. Our folks did a great job of launching that this spring. Again, it's an example of government that works and transparency in government to make it as easy as we can possibly make it for citizens to understand what we're doing, how we're doing it, why we're doing it, and to participate in the process.
Well, thank you so much for your time. It was very interesting and comprehensive. I've covered a lot of ground there, so thank you so much, and I hope you get a good crowd at your listening session today.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here.
Okay.